Thank you for joining me on the Sports in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Marc Rowley joins me for episode 30, and it has quickly become one of my favorites. There is so much information in this one. We talk about his background as a producer and coordinating producer at ESPN, how he became known as the GSD guy at the Worldwide Leader, which led to many technical innovations, and also how he's using his engineering skills and inventions in the technology world. Marc credits a lot of people in our conversation, so take notes and take a listen to hear this fascinating episode. If you're listening to this podcast, be sure to subscribe to the Sports in the Making YouTube channel to see visuals of what we discuss. Marc Rowley joins me on this episode to talk a bit about technology and how it applies to sports. Marc was a producer for SportsCenter at ESPN for a number of years, including the first esports producer at ESPN, and was part of the team that brought some of the Emmy award-winning innovations that you see on your screen come to life. He is an innovator, inventor, and has been a huge influence on how the NFL has officiated games. Marc is currently CEO and co-founder of the following companies, and that seems to be just scratching the surface: Tachyon League, Mempoverse, Jam on Main LLC Investments, and Live CGI, his latest. Marc, you haven't been too busy since I last saw you back when we were at ESPN.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of fun. Retired in 2017, took a little time to be with my kids, and then created a company. We've been having a blast since then.
Yeah, so how did you get into television and sports to begin with?
Camera fell on my head.
Did what?
A camera fell on my head. Dead serious. So what happened was this. My dad was working at the Pentagon, and I graduated high school in D.C. I went to a whole bunch of high schools, military kid, so travel around the world. And I went to Virginia Tech to be an engineer. And I was in a communications class, and a tall, lanky dude named Mark Clark walked in and said, "We're looking for people to work on the football team." And I was like, "That sounds cool." So I showed up my boss, this guy named John Kavadik, great dude. And John was like, "Yeah, dude, we already hired." I was like, "Could I do it for free?" He goes, "No one works for free." I'm like, "Can I get my laundry done?" He's like, "That's an idiot thing to say, but let's figure it out." So the arrangement was, for my first year at Virginia Tech, is I got to get some team clothes and some team laundry, which is pretty cool for me. And then I would pull cables on the sidelines every now and then when I wasn't working on a game or shooting video for the football team. And I think it was like 93, 94. I was doing a game, pulling cables. It was a Miami game. Might have been 95. I remember from 94. And fans stormed the field. And there's a camera called the cart camera, which is on the truck. And that camera fell down. And I was the dude underneath it, so I caught it so it didn't hit me in the head. And as this is happening, I'm holding up the camera. I'm like, "Hey, how do I get out of here?" Game ends, finally pull the cart camera off of me and all that kind of stuff. I get back to the truck. There's a guy named Chris Farrow, and Chris is like, "That was awesome. You saved the camera." And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." Didn't want to be like, it totally was going to hit me in the head. And he said, "Hey, do you want an internship or a job?" I was like, "Yes, I do."
That quick?
And that got me a job at what was then called Creative Sports, which became ESPN Plus out of Charlotte. And started working for a guy named Barry Sachs and Jamie Shifton, doing a show called RPM The Night with a bunch of really cool folks. Joe and Mark and the whole crew. It was a lot of fun.
That's really interesting because Chris Farrow is my fourth guest that I've had on my show.
Chris Farrow has hired or met everyone in the world. He's
pretty much.
Yeah, he's the nicest human in the world. And I always joke, without him, I wasn't here. Without Mike Moore being down there, all those guys, yeah, it was, from Mick to Katz to the whole crew to Scotty Matthews and his dad Lauren was amazing. Yeah, they took care of me that first few years.
So getting into the networks then, what was the process for you? I mean, a camera falls on you and suddenly you're hired. I'm sure there was a lot of details in there, but
what happened was I got a job I was supposed to be an intern there at Creative Sports, and inadvertently I screwed up my paperwork at Virginia Tech. There's an office called Burse Office and Burse Hall, and I messed it up. And they told me that I was no longer going to get credit for it. So I was really distraught that day, and I talked to my new boss, a guy named Bob Delano, and I was like, I got nothing for it, man. I got no money. I'm down here. I'm really stuck. My family didn't have much money, so I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to make it work. He goes, "I'll pay you $250 to do this job." And I got really mad at him. I was like, "I need more than $2.50 an hour. Let me yell at him for at least 5 minutes." He goes, "Son, sit down." I'm like, "What?" He goes, $250 an hour. And if you work more than 7 hours, you get $500 a day. And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah. You're the only kid that we know that knows how to edit on Avid." I'm like, "Well, yeah, we had it in school." And he's like, "Yeah, no one knows what Avid is, so go do it." So I was one of their first Avid editors in 1993, or 94, whatever it was. Can't remember what year it was.
And I learned that day, don't argue with Bob. He did make me sweep the studios for 2 weeks for yelling at him. And I did sweep those studios every day because I felt like an idiot. Past then, I started working. I did local gigs, local station in Roanoke, did some of that stuff. I worked for CBS, Fox, did a lot of camera pulling, over-the-shoulder cameras. I did some kind of shows. And got back to school, and Coach Beamer and those guys gave me a scholarship for shooting video for the football team. Myself and a guy named Pete. John split it up for us. I did that for a couple of years, and then the folks in Charlotte kind of said, do you want to do more? And I started doing more for Charlotte, so I dipped out of Virginia Tech. And then I can't remember what year it was. Must have been 98 or so. I was talking to Scott Matthews, and he was like, hey, you should just go to apply for being in Bristol. And I said, sounds good. So I sent an application in, did my Algae test, which every PA did. And I got in, skin of my teeth, that kind of stuff, and became a production assistant for ESPN as a first real job. And then about a couple people from ESPN quit, and they needed full-time production people, but I had to switch to remote production. But I'd been doing remote production for about 4 years. So I had to ask my boss at the time, a guy named Mike McQuaid, would he let me quit the job and go work for a guy named Mo Davenport? And Mike was not happy to have that conversation, if I say the least. He's really nice, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in television. Everyone who works with him loves him. But he was like, you're only here for like 3 weeks and you're leaving? I was like, but they offered me a full-time job. So I exited out and technically got promoted as a PA within a few weeks. And then worked in remote for a while.
Stepping back slightly, because I'm sure a lot of people who are outside of TV maybe want to get into it, might want to know what the process of getting a job at ESPN, at least at that time, was like.
It's changed a lot. And whether it's ESPN or Fox or any broadcast media you go to, or even a local shop you go to, what you had to do is you had to show three things. You had to show you were committed to working the time that it took to get there. Because everyone who's an executive, they might look like they don't know what they're doing. Trust me, they bust their butt. And it's not easy to do that job. And you might be like, oh, that guy doesn't know anything. You're wrong. They do. They're working hard. They're working late at night, 2 a.m. They're answering questions. I have not met one person in media who's not busting their butt. So you got to be able to do that. That's that first thing. And the second thing is you got to be able to be very clear on what your goal is and be able to articulate it relatively quickly, but not too quickly. You got to give a chance for people to respond to it. And then third, you got to show some work. So people always ask me, how do I get started? I said, start streaming. Do an interview. Do something. Show me you have the ability to put a story together, because ultimately Ryan McGee's a really nice guy, does the Marty McGee stuff. Ryan's great. And he would joke with me and he would tell me, like, what's your story? And he always asks a story. So now Ryan's doing all this crazy stuff. I'm like, yeah, he's a story guy. He always asks. I always call Mr. Ben Hauser, who's working at, I think, WWE now, I call him Mr. Story. Like, the guys, they just know how to tell a story. Corey Kozak did the same thing. All those crew were like, what is your story? So have a story, or at least be able to tell a story. If you can do those things, you can focus on how you can work your energy effectively. If you can be cognizant of what's around you and you start making some content, people will look at you and go, oh, there's something you can do. And if you are wondering how to do it, there's 10-year-olds right now that stream and make effective content. It's really about going in and saying, tell a story. But at the media and broadcast level, you have to be able to tell somebody else's story. And that gets a little harder. And that gets, can you listen and can you drag along? And demonstrating that's what gets people noticed.
And the one thing that I think was part of number 2 was taking initiative, because if you don't have that, nothing is ever going to happen. And then people are going to either tell you what to do or expect that you're going to be gone soon because you have to initiate your own.
My favorite conversation is someone's, well, no one called me back. Did you call them? I didn't want to bug them. You're out.
Yep.
And I mean that in a rude way, but that's if you're not following up, you don't have to be a bulldog. You don't have to chase them every day, but respectively, hey, it's been a week, I haven't heard from you. And you also have to understand that sometimes it's busy, right? It took me 6 months to get into one interview, but at the end of that, I got some of the coolest things out of it I've ever imagined. I was trying to get into the CERN, which is the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, because I wanted to learn how they bent some light and what they were doing, which sounds like kind of weird, but ultimately what it means is it took me 6 months to get in, and then Dr. Stephen Goldfarb answered the phone and said, if you make it to Switzerland, I'll find a way. And I got there with a friend of mine, and we sat down, and the guy taught us how to bend light in a way that made me change how we bend glass, that eventually became what is the Pylon camera. If I didn't go to that meeting at CERN, I don't know how to do this stuff. Sometimes you just got to keep working at it. It's a crazy story, but it's true. It's like, that's how it happened. You got to keep pushing.
We'll talk about the PylonCam in just a few minutes. But first, when you became a PA, you obviously made some progressions to become a producer. What were the things that you first started producing at ESPN?
First thing was Women's World Cup.
No. First it was college football highlights. That was easy because I knew football relatively well. Not in a boisterous way, but I'd worked with Coach Foster at Virginia Tech and learned how to do the covers and what the things were, and I paid attention. And it's cool now. Brent's now a coach at Virginia Tech, which is crazy to watch. And just being on the team and being around football, just like it, love it or not, it's in my DNA. I've done so much football now; it's just what I've always been. And when you learn at the coaching level, you learn the specifics, so it becomes really easy to talk to an analyst to highlight. Coach Makovic was our halftime guy that time. It was funny because he was actually the coach opposite of us in the Sugar Bowl for Virginia Tech. So it was really easy to have a conversation with Coach Mack. And he's like, look, I need a two-back set. But I'm like, no problem, I can do that. And was able to get those done really fast because that's what I had been taught. So that just kind of the sense of, that was easy for me about kind of what I was doing. And that's where I started with college football. Then it rolled into World Cup, like I said. Did baseball for Tim Scanlon for years. That was fun. Basketball for Brian. I was kind of a bumbling idiot as far as like, I'll take whatever job you guys give me, just let me work. And they worked me hard. I there was one pay period I had like way too many more hours. Like it looked like I didn't sleep, and that's just what it was. And people in HR reached out and was like, hey, you kind of need to, you need to slow down. I was like, I can do this. And they're like, yeah, like slow it down. I was like, I got it. I was learning. They're like, yeah, you're taking on too much. And it was helpful to lean that way and think about it. And I'm very happy for people to teach that. But for me, it was just try each shot. And I crossed everything. College football. I did some hockey too. It was crazy.
And this is all in the studio, or did you actually go out on
an
event
remote.
too?
It was the first 3 or 4 years I was remote there, I think.
When I was doing my research on you, and I looked at a lot of the things that you've done at ESPN, you won an Emmy in 2002 as a producer on SportsCenter. 2003, again, producer on SportsCenter, Emmy. 2009, you inventor of the virtual playbook. You won an Emmy. 2009, IBC Global Content Creation Virtual Playbook. 2009, first 4K video broadcast in live sports.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that, yeah.
2010, Emmy producer for College Game Day.
And that was tabletop, yeah, that was fun.
And then 2010, I'll stop right here because we'll get into some of the other stuff later. 2010 Media Vanguard Award for Virtual and Augmented Reality Productions.
Yeah.
You produced a lot of stuff in general, but then you started transitioning into the technology part of it. How did that happen?
So I went to school and I said to be an engineer at Virginia Tech, and I learned how to program and learned how to write in C++, and that was kind of like my background. So I just naturally had an affinity towards technology, but I was decent at telling sports stories. And ended up becoming really good friends with the people in the technology team at ESPN because I spoke their language and understood, like when someone says, why doesn't this work? Well, because it's not written in code. Well, do you know that? I can read that, and I can tell you that's weird. How do you read that? Like, I learned that's what I learned. So it was kind of interesting, and I had some really good mentors there from Chuck Pagano, who's amazing, Aaron LeBurge, Anthony and Rob, and all the different people you run across. And one of my favorite was John Zeri, who I absolutely drove nuts. I love John a lot, but there were times the guy wanted to just hit me in the head sometimes because I wasn't paying attention. But John was the best in the world. But what happened was I wanted to try and solve a problem, and I made a pitch in '99, into '99. About creating a whole new network around basically just data and sports and finding a way to bridge the internet over. And to my surprise, a guy named John Kozer was like, hey, that's pretty cool. You need to talk to technology and do more. And then that's when I met the other bosses like Norby and those guys are like, hey, what can you do here? And then ironically, the boss that I exited out of, Mike McQuaid, had to go back to him and say, would you hire me again? So that's kind of how it happened. I was like, I'm sorry I left a couple of years ago. Would you hire me again? And to my surprise, he did. So it's worked out good. And they said, you got to work with the technology guys to find out how to translate. And I think that's the skill that I learned was because I spent the time to understand how computers are put together, how code is written. I'm not really good at coding. I can write in Unreal blueprints right now. I can do those things. But I understand when my engineers are telling me something, hey, this isn't going to work because of this. I don't argue with them. And I say, okay, well, how do I resolve it? Because engineers think problem solution. And that's not how everyone thinks. So if you can understand how to translate, then you make the link. So I got assigned to be the liaison between production and technology. So while my name is listed on those awards, the virtual playbook was Mike Zigmont, Michael Gay, and Steve Keeney. Those guys had just great ideas and got it started. And what they needed was someone like, how do I take this cool technology and get the talent on board? How do I get it? How do I package it up? That was where I came in. That was my job was, okay, well, I think this is cool. Let's do it this way. And figuring out how do I bridge the gap. So it was kind of a weird technical producer, creative producer type role that just is what it is. So that's kind of how it started. It was mostly organic.
Now, reflecting on those three things that you really needed to have any kind of success at ESPN, how did you apply those when it came to the technology aspect?
I screwed up one time really bad. We had a meeting and we were in the studio, and Michael will tell you this day. That I was like, "Hey, you guys got to be on time," and it's studio time, so it's limited. And the technology guys weren't there, and it was like 5 minutes gone by. So I started calling them, and there was a paging system at ESPN. Started paging them, and I started calling them on their cell phone, like, "Where are you guys at?" Dude walked in, and he's like, "I'm sorry, we were 7 minutes late, but that's not how you work with us." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "That's not respectful. You give us a chance. We're working here." And I was like, "You know what? You're right. I was probably too pushy." He's like, "We'll work with you, but you have to adjust how you do it." And I realized I was aggressive, but I'd pushed too far. And to his credit, he taught me a lesson that day that I'm forever thankful for. And we're still friends from this day on. He was kind enough to tell me, you can push, but don't push your team in a way that's negative. So I learned there's a balance. And that was probably the first day that I can look back and say I really grew up as a leader, because someone was able to tell me this is not how you do it. And the funny thing was other people wouldn't tell me that. But it took him to be able to say, this is how you do it better. And from that day on, things got a lot better. And all of a sudden I was able to get more done because I switched from trying to say go, go, go to how do I help? How do I help? How do I help? And I don't remember, I was probably 27, 28 years old. And my life got immensely better from that moment on, because I was able to listen, like I was saying earlier, figure out what their story was, but still be driven for it.
What are some of the processes that you have when you get an idea and then you want to pitch it?
Oh, pretty simple. I have 2 videos I watch a week. In the morning, the first video I watch is Lin-Manuel Miranda when he pitched Hamilton to the White House. I watched that video because at that moment, nothing had happened. Hamilton hadn't really happened. So to watch that guy go through that process of having to get on stage and pitch his idea to the world, that it still motivates me to this day. I went to Hamilton in the city, New York, about 2 weeks ago just to watch it again. That was a moment for me of okay, this is how you be confident about your ideas. And if you're not confident enough to stand on stage, don't do it yet. You're not ready yet. You have to be that confident to where you can stand in front of the President of the United States and say, this is my idea, and it's amazing. And I tell that to every entrepreneur the same thing. If you're going to pitch an idea, you have to be willing to tell your friends, tell the president, tell whoever you can, this idea is so good, you want to back it. And if you don't feel that confident about it, don't come into the room. It is not worth it. Your energy will sell the idea. And if you're like, I think the idea is okay, it's done. The second video I watch is the Princier, the video of the what if I didn't do this? If I pass away, what will I miss? Just to make me think about what did I do this week and did I do a good job? So that's how I approach my day. So when I have an idea that I want to pitch, I think, okay, well, one, who's going to care? A friend of mine, Neil Mant, says, who's the buyer? Right? Who's going to buy this idea? Who's going to adopt it? Second is a guy named Ed Placey always told me, can you do it 10 times? Because if it can be done 10 times, then it has repetition. Marina always told me, why does it matter to them? So if I think about who's the buyer, can I multiply it, and why does it matter? I've got something that I can pitch. And if I feel confident in my idea, then I can go forward. Just real simple lessons that you look at people and they're like, this is how you do it. So that's what I would tell you.
Just a quick backstory on how we met. I had been in ESPN International, and I was looking to go outside of my group and try and get into different aspects. And I did get to a final interview with Dan Steer and Tina Thornton and a couple others. I didn't end up getting the job, but I followed up to figure out what I could do differently. And the one thing that Dan Steer told me was you need to network better because nobody knows who you are. And That was really good advice. And I asked him if there was anybody that I could talk to about how to network. I understood how the relationships work, but I didn't understand networking in the network. And the first person he said was Marc Rowley, and that was you. And he explained why. He said because Marc has his hands in everything. He knows everybody. He's been able to do a lot of different things in this network. And when he told me some of the things that you had worked on, I said, yeah, I definitely have to talk to him. And so we met, if you remember, in the lunchroom I had just gotten back from the Dominican Republic. My watch had stopped. My battery had died while I was down there, and that was the first thing I think you had mentioned to me is you need to make sure that your watch is has the correct time. And I looked at it and I said, "Oh man, it stopped." But anyways, I found out from you then that the old ESPN rundown was a part of what you were a part of, and that was the text of what was coming up next on SportsCenter. And I believe the bottom line, is that correct?
Yeah, bottom line was not me. Bottom line was well before me. That was I don't know the actual story. I know Lauren Matthews was involved. I don't remember how it all got originated. That was definitely not me. Mine was I pitched an idea to Fred Gaudelli for the NFL draft about doing like a compression stuff. We done a couple compressions. I don't remember if Freddie was still there or not, but I got the NFL draft compression done, and this guy named Steve Bernstein in technology helped us get that done. And then I had a gentleman on my team named Joseph Hamilton, and I was like, hey, can we just do this thing full time? And he's like, maybe. So I pitched Norby doing it on SportsCenter and didn't like the idea, which may have been like 04, 05. Somehow the guys at PTI asked questions. We sent stuff, but they had already had their stuff set up. I don't remember. I talked to Aaron Solomon. I don't remember how that happened, but I pitched it for Cold Pizza, which became First Take. So we did a lot of those. Like I was like, you got to have the graphic on screen. And the story I would tell was there's an annoying Yankee fan which would literally call me up and like, hey, when's the Yankee highlight? And I'd be like, I don't know. So I'd look in the rundown and I'd tell him. But he just kept calling me every freaking night. When's the Yankee highlight? So I tell him. So I'm like, we just got to put it on the screen so the guy doesn't keep calling me. And people would joke like, you're nuts. I'm like, no, it's going to work. The second part of that was I wanted every highlight to have a bar in the bottom of it to tell you when the highlight was done, which they do now, which I think is awesome. But I pitched that for years and never got there. And obviously, I'm not saying it was my idea. That was just an idea people would ask me about. But it was just like, how do you help the audience understand? And Craig Bankston asked one day, like, hey, I think we're going to do this live rundown. How do you get it done? I'm like, it's going to be hard, but we can set it up. So we set the system up, and I spent, 45 days. I don't think I took a day off, and I did every overnight SportsCenter and Master Control. I got to know the Master Control people a lot. Love them. They're so great in Master Control because their job is the last line out.
And that is your expertise as networking.
Well, I just sat there and I'm like, what are you doing? What's your job? I don't know.
Yeah.
And Aaron Coleman made me sit there, and Don Skinner made me sit there and said, this is their job, and watch what these people do and figure out how to make their job better without making it harder. And that was hard. But once we figured it out, we figured out how to run the system. And it's still running now, but Joseph did a lot and Craig did a lot, and they finally let the rundown go live. The irony is, and not many people know this, but the first rundown that went up was actually on the other side of the screen, on the right side of the screen, because I grew up as a kid in Japan, and I learned how to read from right to left, not left to right. So I put it on the right side, and the graphics were like, no, Americans read left to right. I'm like, oh, well, I read that way. And they're like, you're an idiot. So the original first one was on the wrong side. It wasn't until they were like, let's Americanize this thing. So yeah, so that's a fun little oddity that people are like, was it ever on the other side? It was, for a brief moment when the kid from Japan was able to do stuff. So
that's good stuff. So when you're doing something like that, are you the point person, and then you're bringing teams in to help, with the technology, the graphic design, obviously the producers or the executives have to see it. What goes into building something like that and getting it out?
Every project I had, and people in my office would know, I had a whiteboard with a map on it. What I would do is I would create a map of who's in charge of what, and who has to make what decision, and then I figure out where do the decisions intersect. So if it's operation, do I got to go talk to Mr. Paiva? If it's this, I got to go talk to Stacy. Do I have to go talk to Jay? Like I would create the map of who the person is, and then I lay out where they overlap the most. And then I would go talk to the person who had the most overlap. That was the easiest way to try and figure out, because if you understand who reports to who, then you understand who's in charge of what, and then you can start figuring out where do I go. And that was pretty much what it is. And every time I had to ask something to figure out, well, what did they need before I asked for what I need? So if I could find out, well, hey, they have this problem, can I solve that problem for you? So it was a lot of problem swapping and trying to figure it out, and just trying to see, well, if you need this, can I make this for you? And then a lot of, how do I get a sync up? Well, I've got, a team and I need 4 more bodies. Okay, well, that's 4 bodies, 4 people, 4 brains. Okay, but I have a team that someone needs 3, so can I figure it out? So we ended up creating a lot of little jobs that became careers for people because there were needs in different teams that crossed over. So there's a lot of that kind of create a map. So if you're trying to pitch an idea right now, it's a little history, but going forward, whatever company you're in, figure out who needs your idea. and then figure out where the crossover is. And then if you can build enough groundswell support, by the time it got to the big boss, it wasn't my idea. It was not. It was. I was barely even a process of it. It was like, well, this guy's involved somehow. So that's kind of how we did it. It was, let's find a way to get everyone convinced that they want to do it, and then sell the idea through. And it usually worked, I would say, maybe 60, 70% of the time. But you had to listen. It took longer, and frustrated some people because you have to just listen. But once you listen well enough, you find out what the problems are and you can solve it.
They became the champion of what you wanted to accomplish to begin with.
And it changed. It wasn't my idea anymore. And that was the best part about it is I got recruited really hard in late 20s. Guy wanted me to do some big network. And he asked me, like, are you an ideas guy? And I'm like, no, I'm a GSD guy. He goes, oh, what? So yeah, pardon my expression, but get S done. That's what my job is. I just GSD it. That someone says I need to have a problem, go fix it. So that's how people used to introduce me at the executive level. So
where do you think that GSD comes from with you?
My mom, my dad. I mean, my dad flew for the Navy for 20 some odd years, designs all kinds of stuff. My mom was a school teacher and just said to just go find a way to get it done every day. And then when you're done, take a nap and rest and be good. So I watch a video every morning and play a little bit of video games and I start my day and go on from there. And been blessed to have 2 kids and a wonderful wife and just try and get something done every day and have a little positive influence. So.
I mean, it's definitely reflective in all the stuff that I've just partially read from you. I have to refer to it again here in a few minutes. But video games, how long have you been playing and how do you feel that's helped you in your career?
So I play a game every day. I've been playing since I've been however age, whatever I had one. The video games are interesting because they do 2 or 3 things for you that are interesting. They create dopamine in your brain, which create little happy circles that you feel positive. So if you play a game and you achieve something, you start your day with an achievement. I think his name is Admiral Raven, did a famous speech about making your bed in the morning. SEALs team, if you make your bed in the morning, you go to bed at night, you're going to have a made bed, right? It's a simple thing. I make my bed, I play a game, and then I start my day. Whether it's on my phone or PC, whatever it is, I just do something. So I've started my day with a positive effect because I have never no idea how bad my day is going to be. You don't know. It's the random Tuesday where someone passed away that you don't want to fear about or something happened. But I do that kind of piece of my day. The second thing about games, after creating that cool emotion, is they teach you logic and sequence. So whether or not you're playing a random game, like an old game like Turmoil, which is like old oil mining, or you play Fallout or Call of Duty, whatever it is, you teach a sequence and it runs you through a repetition. So it gets your brain associated structure because a game is just a loop of structure. So if you think about how structured a video game is, it's an experience. That's how your life is. They're just producing different kind of content. Those are really the 2 things I think about where gaming helps. And the third is obviously the entertainment side. When we won the Virtual Playbook Emmy, my wife was pregnant with my son, and we got up on stage. It was the coolest moment for me on stage probably was I was standing there, and Frank was next to me and goes, "Hey, John Madden's smiling." I was like, "Yeah, that's cool." And I looked down. I met John a bunch of times, so I was like, and he looks at me and goes, "Yeah." And I was like, it was a cool moment. I was like, that's pretty freaking cool. And when I got done, my wife was like, "You're going to be able to play video games for the rest of your life." I'm like, "Uh-huh, yes we are."
Wow.
So, yeah, that was a fun moment of life. It's just like, could care less about the rest of it, but that was a really neat moment to see him do that. And with his game, by the way, it was Madden game that we did it with. And then just to walk off stage, and my wife was like, "I'm never going to hear the end of this." I'm like, "I get to play games, right?" She's like, "Yes, you do."
So talking about the technology back in how it relates to sports television, ESPN, before we visit the PylonCam, what were some of the innovations that you had prior to that?
They were all ones at the company. So for me, it's when you retire, they give you the banner and they sign it. So that's why it's in the back of my office here. I don't know. There's things I worked on, but if you ask me what my biggest thing was, it was really creating jobs for people. So I'd helped create a job called graphics producer, which a lot of people now have that job. That was really cool. So that's the innovation I look at, was finding there's a need for this job. Myself and a guy named Pete were the first 2 to do that job. So that was really cool. And then create managing jobs around that. When you can create a job for somebody, you demonstrate a need, then you demonstrate growth. That's the cool innovation that I feel cool, because that helps a person. Technology innovations, they come and go. I mean, people are like, "Oh, I found a new way for someone to run 25 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour and see what it is." Like, those are cool and those catch your eye. But when I can create a job for someone, that's really neat. We did some cool tracking stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think more for me, it's if I can create a job for somebody. It might not be the answer you're expecting, but when I can create a job, that's a transitional moment because now someone's got a job, someone's got someone else. It just becomes really cool. The touchscreens, though, I think those were fun because it really wasn't me. That was a guy named Brad and a couple other folks that come with some really cool ideas. And I was like, "Ooh, this is neat." So I enjoyed the touchscreens. Funny story about the touchscreen. So the CNN virtual wall with all the elections, I was a day late to that. Day late to that. I met Jeff. Jeff was the guy who was selling them, and I got in the office a day late after the CNN guys were there, and I was pitching him on ESPN. He's like, "I'm doing CNN." I'm like, "Come on, man, for the draft to be great." And he canceled with us, went with CNN, which was a great move for him. They eventually got bought by Microsoft. It was great, but that was one I really wished I'd gotten that day because there was so much good things there, and we ended up buying the unit, which was great. But it was one of those weird things that I wish I would have been able to help drive that one forward.
Now, you did mention that I was probably surprised by that answer, and to be honest, I was because I was expecting the technology part. But creating jobs is a really interesting thing. And you mentioned graphics producer. Was the role before that then just like font operator
It was
or
production assistants that would be assigned to work with people? But what we did is I give Pete Treadwell a lot of credit. He came up with some really cool ideas about how to combine graphics into templates. I think we had maybe 10,000 templates to begin with, and then he figured out how to make it like 72 or some crazy number. And then it was a guy named Keith Lipscomb and Brian Graham. I think those were the four of us. I might miss a name here. I apologize if I missed someone. Joe was there too. There's a bunch of us were in there, and it was really like it was how do we create a system that becomes really cool for people and they can track through. So those are the things that I think about. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to continue reading the list here. 2011 Emmy producer for College Game Day. Yep. 2014 ESPN esports producer. You were the first one of those.
That was Heroes of the Dorm. That was a cool event. That was who was it? Kevin Lopes helped set that up. Cliff Shoemaker, awesome. We call him Uncle Cliff. He helped set it up. I was just an assistant on that, and all of a sudden, they're like, "You're the producer." I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "That wasn't me. It was a guy named Pete that ran it." So I just helped out a little, but it was the first time we ever did something. So I got to go be the guy in the truck and just hang out and watch and help a little bit along the way. So it's funny. It's like my title's I've been an executive producer or something. I've been a production assistant. Whenever I would travel to a trade show, it said junior technical analyst on my title. Because if it said this guy has money and will spend it with you, I was everyone's friend. The junior technical analyst, no one knew. Right, so if I'm going to spend $3 million at a trade show, I was the target. But if a junior technical analyst, no one cared. So I would always show up, and the bosses would be like, "Really?" Like, "Yeah, talk to that guy. He's in charge." So I was able to learn a lot more when no one thought I had a target when I didn't have a target on my head.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard someone say they downgraded their title.
Title didn't matter. I actually another funny little story was I figured out how to change my title in the system at ESPN, and I changed it to director of robotics one time just to see what happened. And I got a call from my boss, "Who gave you the promotion, director of robotics?" I'm like, "Oh, you found it?" He's like, "What did you do?" I was like, "I figured out how to do it." He's like, "Don't do that." I was like, "Sorry." It was funny though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, being the first esports producer at ESPN, and now you see what's out there for esports, what do you think?
Love it. Absolutely love it. I think it's one of the most pure form of competition, period. And I mean, I'm a huge NBA 2K fan. Like, you're not going to find me that. Call of Duty, love it. I'm actually working with the teams at Oxygen right now, which is the Call of Duty team, Boston Breach, up in Foxborough. Like, love them. Have a great time with them. Just absolutely pure enjoyment with esports. And again, the 2K League, those TJ, Matt, those guys are amazing. They just do so much good stuff. Adam's really helpful. Like, we love watching 2K League, and it's been a lot of fun for me just to see how, because people love playing games, and all of a sudden, like, you can have fun with them. I mean, it's like, it's so cool to see. So that's just my take.
2014, the first ESPN drone racing producer. Drone is now taken off too.
We ran drones in a facility in Boston, and I actually bought a paintball machine gun, and I shot the drones as they were coming through, which was not a good idea. They were like, "Don't do that again." I was like, "Sorry." But we did drone racing. It was really, I was hoping it would take off. It didn't go as well as I wanted. But the irony is, one of the person on my team, a woman named Jenny Evans, is now one of the directors of operations of the Drone Racing League. And I talked to her like maybe a month ago. And I was like, that's so cool. I never thought she would, like, Jenny is so freaking awesome. And she's like, I'm doing this. And I'm like, great. Like, you don't want to talk to me, but here's the guy to go talk to. So yeah, I love drones too.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to continue down the list here. 2014, the first live 360 virtual reality use in Monday Night Football.
Oh yeah, that was the C360 guys. That was really cool. We put a camera off a Spider Cam. I think it was Spider. I'm not sure. It might have been Skycam.
Spider Cam is the cam.
Yeah, there's a couple of different companies. I think it was Spider Cam, although I can't remember. I think because I remember talking to Jan about it. So I think it was Spider Cam. But C360, which right now they make a lot of the Pylon stuff. Evan and Joe are great. I think Jed's still over there. Like, they do a great job. Just really smart engineers. We put this thing, we hung it off. We hung this virtual reality camera off, and it's flying around like crazy. And I walked out of the truck, and there's some kids standing out there. I was like, hey, you guys want to try? Like, what? I'm like, it's like we had an Xbox joystick hooked up to the camera, and they were having a blast. I don't know. They were with Steve Young, who's one of the announcers, and they were just having fun doing it. And Chip was our director. He's like, who's controlling that? I'm like, a couple of 10-year-old kids. He's like, that looks good. I'm like, great. Yeah, we tried to make everything like a game, and that was a cool moment. I want more of that, but I don't know where it ended up with. But that was a lot of fun.
The technology that I think has had one of the biggest impacts on sports, at least in the NFL, and that is the PylonCam. In 2015, you had an Emmy nomination for that. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it is because of its impact and how it started. With all of your background and in technology, engineering, and then sports production, when was your first thought that this could be something?
So the guys at Fox did a version, I want to say like 04, 05, where they did a single camera and a pylon, but I don't, there was some problems with it. I can't remember the exact details of it, but I remember seeing it. We talked about it in maybe 2000, 2001, like how could we get it done? And I was in my son's bedroom playing with Legos, and I'm like, there's got to be a way to keep it cold, because the problem isn't cameras. The problem was very simple. You are on the field in Gainesville, Florida. It is 100 degrees outside, humidity is 99, and the pylon is going to sit for 10 hours before you turn it on at night. How hot is that going to get? It's a heat problem. It was never about cameras or angles. And then the second is it's a power problem. How do you get power to it? So I came up with an idea I liked, pitched it to John and Ed Placey, and I was like, what do you think? And Ed's like, let's try it. So I went back and I was like, I got to figure out how to solve this. And through a couple conversations, I ended up with an engineer named Gaines Johnson. I said, Gaines, do you have an idea? He goes, I think I do, but let me start running through it. Then I went to the MIT Camera Culture Club and had a conversation there, I think, or trying to sync it all in. And then Chris Pond and Dave Casamone are like, I think I can find a way to transmit it. So it was really the three of them down in Orlando, and I flew down a couple times. We walked through it, and then I was like, okay, this is cool. How do I really get this thing moving forward? And ultimately, I had to go to the pylon manufacturer, a gentleman named Neil Gilman, and I talked to Neil, and Neil was like, you know what, this is cool. Let's find a way. And that was probably the coolest moment, because you had to convince the guy who's in charge of the pylons to like it. And he was like, I've always wanted to do it, but we've never been able to find a way. So when we proposed a solution, he really liked it. So I still have, this is the mold we made. This is so old. Like, they let me keep it when I left. It was really cool. But this is the mold that had some of the fans right here. And we actually, inside of it is a 3D printed core. So I'll show you what that looks like. This is the first one. So half of it's missing, and it's made out of 3D plastic, and kind of see what it is. So we literally cut a hole with a knife. Nothing more than that. Jammed it in, and was like, okay, I think we can make this work. And this was how the first PylonCam worked, and kind of the setup for what it was, and the one we actually drew on it. So we cut the foam like that, but then we realized, okay, well, let's figure out a way to mold it. And the first one, I believe, was 2013 Rose Bowl, maybe 2012, I can't remember. This is actually the pylon we replaced. So we'd have the Rose Bowl pylon, we take it out and put the next one on it. But yeah, what it really came up with was, we were talking to the officials, and we were like, hey, I think this would be really cool. And like, yeah, officials don't want to get second guessed, but they always want to get it right. And the officials were like, you know what, this might help us, we really like this. One of the byproducts was it actually showed up the line, so it could show like if a person's running down the line. So it gave a lot of really unique angles that you can't always get from a camera shot. And ultimately, the device is in play. So it became really cool. The first live use of it where we really kind of put it out there. I mean, it was obviously on broadcast early, but we did a game in Frisco, Texas. That was cool. And then we were at Ohio State, Oregon game, and there were no plays on the end line. It was none of them happened on the end line. The next season we did football, we did NFL. At that point in time, there's a couple other companies that were trying for similar type stuff. They'd kind of seen what we had done, which is great. Always love when people look at what you do and say it's kind of cool. And ultimately, ours was the most efficient, the most effective. Never had any heat issues. There's stories about what happened to other folks. I won't go into here, but it's out there. But ultimately, ours was efficient and clean. And also, because ours is fully molded in, it wasn't cut. If a player landed on it and crunched it, it would stay inside. So it's kind of like a box of Legos. You could shake it all you want, but the Legos would never come out. And that's the key about putting it molded. The team at BSI did a great job. There's a guy named Jim Munn that got involved, and man, I give all the credit in the world to a guy named Chris Calcineri, who was like, "This is a cool idea, but it's got to grow up now." So everyone's like, "You're the guy that invented the PylonCam." I'm like, "Not really. I started it." But Gaines, Chris, Dave, Mark Schumacher was in there. Schumann's probably like me. No, I was like Schumacher, but Schumann's great too. And it was just like one of those things. And then Marina's like, let's get it done. Let's find a way. And then Bob was like, let's go. And it was really the operations team at ESPN. They're like, I have a way to make this go from cool idea to just a really repeatable product. And it was funny because I got an award. I have it here. 1 second. I have it here. Great. I got presented these awards for the Best of Technology Award for PylonCam. What's funny is the guy that gave it to me is Scarpy, who's now the head of like technology for SoFi, which is great. So I get these awards, and they hand me these, but there's actually a big plaque. So I'm the guy that gets the award, and there's a huge plaque that goes with it. So I get back to Bristol, and I've got this big old plaque, and I get in the meeting, and we're doing a whole bunch of things, and the boss is like, hey, Mark, can you talk about the award you just won? So I took the award, and I walked over to Chris's desk, and I put it down right in front of Chris, and I'm like, it's not mine, it's his. And he goes, what are you doing? I'm like, your team did it. I just got it started, so thank you. And he started laughing, and got along really well, and that was a nice one. But it was like, the operations team at ESPN is just hands down amazing. Like the Fox team is amazing too, but operations people just know how to get stuff done. And that was the moment where it really grew up. And the C360 guys now take it to a whole nother level, and they're great. I had the secret weapon in a lot of that was a guy named Jed Drake who helped me out a ton. It was like, hey, we need to find a way to make this work. And then worked with Jay Rothman and Chip Dean, and Jay had some great ideas to get in there, and it took an army of us to sell the NFL to get it in. And then there was a game, I don't remember what year it was, but Odell Beckham dragged his toes. And the ref was like, no, it's out. And they used the PylonCam that overturned the call in that game. And that was the coolest moment of it because collectively, all of us, there's 48 people on the Emmy submission. We had made something that actually changed the outcome of the game. So everyone's like, I created a game-changing product. Like, no kidding, we actually did. And that was so cool. But without Chris, Gaines, Dave, Marina, Calcineri, Jim, like all those people in that process, Gil Pascal, and those, without those people in there, it doesn't come to life. So that's the lesson I say I learned from all that is don't consider it your idea. The minute it's got to be your idea, it's going to die. If you look at that and say, this person has a better way to do it, how do I work with them? I mean, it's all good. I'm okay when people say you're the PylonCam guy because I always call Chris and Dave and Gaines are like, hey guys, thanks for getting us here. Because without them, it doesn't happen. So that's the lesson I learned is your team is more valuable than you could possibly imagine. And if you understand it, and the moment when my boss, his name Bob Toms, absolutely lovely guy, and he was like, hey, PylonCam is going over to Chris. I'm like, that's great. He goes, you sure? I'm like, absolutely. He's the right person to run it. He's going to knock it out, and my time is done. He's like, we thought that'd be a problem for you. I'm like, nope. They have better ideas, better execution. Let them take it and let them go with it. So, yeah, I'm the colonel. I don't mean colonel to have me like a little colonel, like a little spark. That was where I started. But no, and it's the funny thing is, I get some credit for it, but without Ed Placey saying go, that first conversation, that first guy that said, I'll back you. So I said a lot of names, and he knows it because I text him every now and then, tell him, but Ed Placey said, let's go do this. And that first push, it's always the hardest one. You've probably seen the video of the guy dancing in this, in the grass by himself. The first person that comes and dances with him, that's the hardest one to convince. But once you get that one, you get another one. And because Ed said yes, it just unfolded from there. So yeah, it's technically I get the name, but yeah. It's that team and how they just reacted around. And yes, there were a lot of people that thought it was a bad idea. There were a lot of people that thought we should kill it, thought it was a waste of money. A lot of that happened, and that's normal. And so when that happens, don't feel bad. Like the project was probably killed 3 or 4 times. I had to find money. I had to find travel money. I had to tack it on to trips. I had to find ways to get it done. But we knew we had an idea and we weren't going to give up. And we had a series of executives that said, go get it done. And I like to joke about the guy, Michael Quaid, I mentioned him earlier. Like twice in my life, he shook my hand. One was when we launched ESPN News. He's like, you did a good job. And second was at the PylonCam launch. He goes, that's a good idea. I was like, yes, I got Mike to say yes. Like those are the fun moments. Like I made him mad probably a lot of other times doing stupid stuff, but you got to be willing to make mistakes. So hopefully that helps with the story.
There's one thing that you said that I think is very valuable for anyone in any industry, and that is it's your idea, but don't, and I'm reading through this, I think what prevents a lot of things is pride, because it is my idea. But you're suggesting, and with success, to just let that go. It's may have initiated with you, but that doesn't mean you create everything and own everything and keep it to yourself. I
guarantee you I am not the smartest person in the room. The only thing that I've learned in all this is find people that are smarter and find a way to work with them. I have an amazing person in my life named Sharita Johnson. And she would tell me that, yeah, you're not the smartest one, but you're good at this. Go figure out smart people around you.
Yeah.
Okay. She's in charge of doing a lot of Peloton content, and she's great. But she would tell me, like, go find smart people around you and encourage them to want to do this, and then you'll succeed. And she's right. Find a way to get the smart people around you and get them to buy into the idea. And that means you got to give up some of the vision, but you give up, you gain so much. So just let it go and see, and you keep a little control as you can, but is what it is. So I get rolled out as the guy, but it's that team. That team is the one that did it.
You've mentioned Legos a couple of times here, and I feel like Legos are really instrumental in a young person's creativity, but even adults now do it. You would put on certain things at ESPN that involved Legos. Could you explain a little bit about that?
I always played Legos in my life. Annually, a year, I spend about $4,000 on Legos. I still do. Everyone might go, what? How do you do all the Legos? They're all over my office. I have planes everywhere. I have all kinds of stuff. I buy every kind of Lego in the world. I just absolutely love just the idea of trying to put something together. It's just a 3-dimensional puzzle, and it really sparks your imagination, your brain. And I don't remember what year it was, but a friend of mine connected me to the guy that created like Lego Mindstorm, who was the head of innovation at Lego. And he's like, well, if you're ever in Berlin, Denmark, let me know. And I'm like, I will find a way. So I was in Amsterdam for a show, and I was like, can I come up? He's like, sure. So I came up and I sat in a room with 3 of the people from Lego. Oliver's one. They're all really cool. And they're like, hey, why does Lego matter to you? I'm like, because you guys solve problems and you take these random plastic blocks and you create worlds out of them that people think are cool. How do you go about the process? And they walked me through, and evidently there's people that, check, does this Lego match with an old system, and how do you do it? And they think about integration first. How does this piece play with the piece from before, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? And that lesson was really key. So whenever I would be asked to do a speech or go do a session with people, I would try and bring Legos. And there's one that I used to do every year. And the guys at Lego would send me like literally crates of Legos every now and then. It was kind of fun. And then it was just a session where we'd sit down and say, okay, let's build something. So one of them was build a new SportsCenter desk. And everyone built the desk. And I know Rick we picked one that we liked, and Rick Paiva was in charge of a lot of the creative at the time. And I think Rick had that in his office for a little while afterwards. He was like, that was cool. Someone made it was a neat idea. And it was just getting people to reset their brain and think, how do you do it? It was like a 2-hour session. It wasn't long. But it was get everyone in the room and just reset your creativity. And when I left ESPN, I scattered my Legos throughout the offices. So people, there's 2 things I left when I left ESPN physically that people have. The Legos are everywhere. Ryan Doyle has my old Lego aircraft carriers, and the thing is like that big. It's like sitting on his desk. I don't know where it might still be there. And the second was for the NFL draft years ago, we did a thing at ESPN where we had these magnetic boards that we move around, like, this team goes here, that team goes here. And I ended up one year somehow having that in my, next to my office was a trash can. So I got the creative trash can, which, by the way, is the coolest trash can you get at ESPN. Because people take all the creative stuff, they throw it out. I'm like, ooh, what's there? And I would sift through the trash. Yes, I'm a dumpster diver. Proud one for creative dumpsters, the best thing. And I found this stack of all these colleges. So I had all these colleges where these players had played for the NFL draft, and one of them was Virginia Tech, my school. So I took it and I just put it above my wall. above my door. And so I had this thing above my door, and I was like, that's a really cool thing. And then I had these things stacked up. Well, I kind of always connected people with the colleges, so I just had a stack of literally like 100 magnets, and I walk around ESPN, and I would stick them over people's doors. I was bored one day. So I stuck them on. I was like, well, Anthony went to West Virginia. Marina's Oklahoma. So I did that. Ryan's a Duke guy. So I stuck him over Ryan's door. So I did that as it literally was kind of a joke. I was just having a little fun one day. Turns out they still do that to this day. Kid you not. People still get those things. They put them over. And it's the same design from like the 2002 draft that was thrown in the trash can. So it's always funny to see. So if anyone from ESPN gets this and wonders how that little magnet college thing got it, I pulled it out of the trash can. So
that's great.
It was dead serious. It was one of those. It was Chris Pelzinski. I don't know where CP is now, but CP was like, "Did you take that out of the trash?" I'm like, "Yep." And Don Antonio was next to me. He was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "This is fun, man. This is great." He's like, "Oh, you're so nuts." So yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was thing. So Legos to me, that it's kind of the same thing. It's like what block connects to somewhere. And so you asked the question about Legos. I was just trying to create that sync there. So it's the same thing with a name tag. Is like, well, how do I create something that'll have a little fun with somebody? So whether you're getting it out of the dumpster, you pull it out of Legos, create a little creative spark, and people have a lot of fun.
What's the value that a Lego can be to somebody, even somebody who doesn't work at ESPN?
So one of the people who I love the most, Stacy William, her husband Marc's great too. Stacy's actually at Lego as a recruiter. So anyone wants a job, you go hit her up. She's awesome. She's gonna give me a hard time for that. But you got to tag her for that. That'd be so much fun. I don't know what time this is, but that'd be fun. She'll give me a hard time. But what Legos teach you three-dimensional building structure, and that three-dimensional structure allows you to think about how do you problem solve. And again, life is, engineers have it right in my mind. Life is about solving problems. What's the problem? What's the solution? How do I get there? If you can't recognize the problem, you're going to just keep repeating the cycle. So it makes you think, what's the problem? The problem is I have to, I got one here. So let me grab this here. This is not a Lego, by the way. This is from a group called Kobe out of Poland, I think. And they make this airplane, which is an F4 Corsair. So it's a really cool airplane, but it's like, how do they make a wing? How do they come up with this, right? How do they do that? This is the Mandalorian thing, right? How did they come up with the idea that this was going to do this? How do they come up with this? Like, there's a thought process here to how this all works, right? Why does this move this way? Like all that kind of stuff is key, and that thought process for what are you going to put together, those are important. Yeah, Legos everywhere.
So how many inventions, first at ESPN, have you been a part of, and then outside of ESPN?
Honestly, at ESPN, I have no idea how to answer that question. I'm not trying to be rude, but there's a lot of things I touched and was a part of. The PylonCam is the most notable one there. The Rundown is the second most notable. I was one of the guys that figured out how to use iPhones regularly for interviews, that kind of stuff. We made some stuff there. Bonded cellular networks, we did some of that. But my job was to try stuff. My job was hey, have this go try it and see where it works. I ended up going to ESPN UK when they wanted to do a virtual tabletop. So cool. Now I'm in the UK doing stuff and helping teach those guys about, how US stuff does and what do we do. That was cool. I ended up going to a place called ILM, which is Industrial Light and Magic. Did stuff, learned from there. I ended up at Pixar one day doing stuff with those guys. I did Disney animation. I got shipped out and did a whole bunch of random stuff. I spent time at a company called Broadway Video, which is where they do Saturday Night Live. Like, it's crazy the amount of things that they would just let me do. Like, hey, there's a problem, go solve it. So if you're known as that kind of stuff, then innovations tend to get tagged your way. But I guess there's a lesson in there that I think I'll share with you. It's not directly related, but it helps me out a lot. There was a gentleman from a research team, and we were in a production, and the gentleman said, hey, I'm 99% sure this is it. And the producer, I won't say their name, but they were great. They're like, what do you mean you're 99% sure? It's like, I'm 99% sure, but I may have to check. He said, hang on. We're about to go on the air and tell 10 million people. If you're not 100% sure, get out of the room, go figure it out, and come back. And that person got upset. Like, what, you mean you're dismissing me? He's like, yeah, go do that and come back. So when people ask me, like, well, what innovations are yours? Like, I am not sure which ones are mine. I know which ones I played a part of, but if I'm not sure, I tend not to say it. Because I learned that lesson early. Like, if you don't know, it's best to kind of say there. So that's a little odd lesson, but there's probably a bunch. Since leaving ESPN, it's been all about creating really cool content, cool pieces. Started a company called TACAN League, which was a cool live action sport. Showed it to a whole bunch of investors, and I had one guy who said, that is the coolest thing in the world that I'm never investing in. I'm like, oh, sorry. But That is awesome. So yes, I invented Tackdown League, but it really didn't go anywhere because at the time I didn't have the technology. Like the idea was you could mint actual moments and put them in the blockchain. And they're like, that is awesome. Great. Did you patent it? I'm like, yeah, I actually filed the patent. So our patent for minting video on the blockchain was filed in 2017, issued in last year. So we're one of the first companies that has a patent for minting live video, which is really awesome. But when I was pitching that idea for Tackdown League, they were like, well, I'm not going to back that, but your technology sounds really cool. Why don't you go do that? So there's a gentleman at a company called Courtside VC named Deepan. Deepan's like, just go build the technology. I'm like, will you give me money? He goes, nope. But your friends and family will, so talk to them. I said, what do you mean? He goes, if you can't ask your friends and family for $5,000 to do this, then you're not ready to come to me. And he was right. And I give him a lot of credit for that advice. So I did. I went and I started knocking on doors. Said, can you give me $5,000, $10,000? And I have a check here. I won't show you the back of it, but it's under my desk right here. My first check. The first check that a friend of mine gave me was $25,000. Blew my mind. And he said, I'm going to back you. And he gave it to me in a bar. He just slid it across. He said, I'm backing you. And I was like, but what if? And he goes, doesn't matter. I will back you. And I'm like, can you afford that? He goes, doesn't matter. Don't ask me that question. I was like, okay, I got it. And it was just that moment of like, now I have to go and ended up hiring a company. So the innovations past that was we created a cool virtual studio that runs on its own. Studio is available in Steam Store right now. Just search Google Studio. Search Virtual Studio, and you'll get the Virtual Studio from Live CGI, which is available to download. That's great. But what happened after that was we created a team that's a company called Live CGI, which actually, as of today, changed our name to Own Your Stream. And the team created a really cool product, which is called Stream My Screen, which now allows anyone in the world for $9 a month to mint any video you want and then sell it. So you go mint and sell it, have a blast. We take 2.5%, which is a credit card. You can make as much money as you want. We saw what was going on. So that innovation, I think, will outlive everything else. I think it'll run in perpetuity. And I believe we can make a lot of people money with their content. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of right now. Other than I have 2 children, I love them the best. Those are probably the coolest things.
That's a given, right? But technology is advancing so quickly. Explain what minting and NFTs are for maybe somebody who's a little bit familiar with it like me.
Yeah, so I'll separate it out. So an NFT is a non-fungible token, which is effectively a file location in a blockchain that some people associate with pictures, gone up and down the association. I take the NFT concept and I move it aside because I think people have a misunderstanding of what it is. So I tend not to even go that way because it created thoughts for a lot of people. Well, NFTs are worth a lot, now they're worth less. NFTs were never worth anything. They're just pieces of code in a blockchain. People assign worth to it, that's what it is. That's a separate issue. What we did is we said, for an economy to work, you need 3 things. You need someone who has something that someone wants, who has someone that someone else wants, and then that connects. If it's just 2 people wanting stuff, economies fall down. That's why a lot of play-to-earn video games broke, because after a while, you couldn't get it, right? It ended up running down. You have to have 3 people that all want something different from everyone else to create an economy. That's kind of how it's set up. And I give, honestly, the salespeople I talk to, Sarah, Cherie, and Rob, they help me out learn that a lot. Like, you got to have something someone wants. And Tina Thornton will always tell me that. Who actually wants this? Don't tell me it's cool. Who wants it and who's willing to buy it? Got it. Let me figure that out. So that what we created with Minting Moments is we have a video that we know advertisers want to buy the eyeballs of people that watch, the consumers that watch. The creator wants the consumers to buy it. So let's create a system where that triangle works. So we created it where there's 15-second videos. You go to mintmystream.com and you sign in. Their little video will show you how to do it. But effectively, once you make your video, you can put it on our chain, which is with the guys called Scale. They do an amazing job. It's an L2. Scale's wonderful. Scale Labs is who they are. And you can actually put that on a private chain, which allows you then to bridge out to ETH to the mainnet. And then you can sell it on the mainnet, which is through a Rarible and OpenSea. But we actually decided, you know what? Let's have a little fun. Let's go after some of the big video websites out there. I'm not going to say them because I don't want to get in trouble, but you kind of figure out where we're going. Let's go after the biggest one we can. So we figured let's take a shot at them and let's find a way to build a better mousetrap. And that's what we built, which is the model is this. If you sell a video, if you make a video right now and you upload it to a website, you usually give them the rights. That's what it is. You sign the rights over. So now they then give you revenue back, and most of those sites give you maybe half the revenue, somewhere in that range. Some give you a little more, but only if you're a special person there. We said what we're going to do is this. If you take a video, you post it on our site, we're going to take 40% of the revenue for us to run the operations. You got to run a business, but 50% of the revenue goes to you. 5% of the revenue goes to whoever owns the clip, and then 5% of the revenue either goes back to the original creator or to whoever else the content is included. So if you're a major media company, Disney, Fox, if you're Activision Blizzard, or if you're Fortnite, you really don't get money from the people that are streaming your games. So our logic was, well, let's make sure that those content creators, because they made that content too, get a piece of it. And I really believe that most creators who do streaming want those people to get a piece of it. They just don't know how. The mechanism's not there. So we wrote it in a smart contract, which means no one touches it. It runs. So once you classify that this is the content, then it goes. And we're growing because of that. So that's the coolest thing for us is those minting of moments. It just started a few weeks ago. 10 years from now, you're going to be like, dude, that took off. I'm like, yeah, it did. Or maybe I was wrong, but I think we're right. I'm really excited. And one of the coolest things about it is what you have to do, though, is once you put it out there, you also have to think about security. And that's an important thing. But, it's Web3, it's secure. Well, it's secure, but it's your computer. How have you done that? So we partnered with a group called Hypersphere Tech. They do a phenomenal job of securing it. So security is a big piece for me. That's always like, how do I set it up? Their team is phenomenal. They help us out a ton. That's great. And we just have an announcement coming out with a VR dating app that wants to mint those dating moments. It makes sense, right? You had your first moment, let's mint it. So I just talked to those guys, and we're going to mint some moments there. And it's just so much fun to see how it's all coming together. And people were like, hey, yeah, I get it. The digital life will continue, so why don't I just catalog that and track that moment? You never know how valuable it's going to be, but it's valuable to you. And if it costs you a few pennies to do it, why not preserve that moment? And so that's how we looked at it. But we do think over time there's value, and especially when you post a video, and if you're one of those creators that people love to follow, those videos have value. So why not share the value with your fans? So we envision that it's a simple philosophy. Digital video is collectible. So let's make sure that everyone can earn from that. So that's the innovation I'm most proud of that is going to be moving on. I know it's a real long-winded answer, but I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quick. You're quick speaking, so people might have to watch it back like me after we're done here. But you make it understandable. And me having just finished a documentary film, I'm a little bit familiar with what you're talking about as well. How does intellectual property play into that?
We don't own it. You do. The name of the company is Own Your Stream.
Yeah.
We don't want to own it. It's not our job. We'll have a set there that'll make sure that we can monitor content as best we can. But ultimately, it's not our job to own that stuff. I think that's the big change that I believe Web3 is going to bring to the world, is making sure that everyone knows that you have to own something. Mm-hmm. So it's a really big key piece. So owning content and IP around it. Look, I've got a bunch of patents. And those patents are cool. I gave some patents to Disney. That was part of my job to get started. But I learned how. I had an amazing patent lawyer named David Foster who taught me how to do things. It was just great and allowed us to go pursue more patents. So I see the value of content, the value of intellectual property, and I really just want to make sure that it's there. And I give Lorenzo all the credit. He listened to us and said, "You should just call it Own Your Stream." I was like, "Okay." Oops. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. So that kind of worked. It's owning your intellectual property is something you never want to give up, but you have to be willing to do it at a level price. Had I not given up my IP at ESPN, I would not be here. So yes, ESPN has some really cool ideas that I helped create, but I helped create it with a guy named Jesse. And Jesse had another idea that Lauren had that it just spawned.
Just
so you got to be
building on top of each other.
My name's on the plaque.
Yeah.
But there's a kid named Kishore. It's not a kid anymore. He's a grown person now. Apologies. But Kishore is like, I got this idea. And my name's there, like one of the 5 guys on there. But without Kishore and Kevin Grealish, it doesn't get further. So it just becomes a perpetual thing. And also what you'll hear from me a lot is I'm throwing a lot of names in this conversation. That's not name dropping. That's how I remember. And I would get in trouble for that a lot. People say, oh, you're name dropping. No, honestly, I'm saying the names so I remember who's in charge. And so you know who to go talk to. That was probably the biggest feedback people got was, you're just a name dropper. No, I'm telling you who to go talk to. So if you don't agree with me, go talk to them.
And in a sense, you're giving them credit.
They deserve it because it's their idea.
Yeah. You've mentioned, we've talked a lot about technology, NFTs, esports, augmented reality versus virtual reality. What do you think the future is from that? And I asked that because I have a conversation I had this morning with somebody that I met on a networking group who wanted to kind of know what your thoughts were on that.
MojoVision. Check out MojoVision. There's a gentleman I met at Google last years ago named Eric Johnson. He's over there. I think he's still there. I check it out, but MojoVision is the contact lens that allows you like the cool AR stuff. I believe that's where it's all going to go. VR does a couple of things. VR allows you a safe space to experience things. And I do think there is something very special about that, and it'll always be special to VR because you're in the world. And they're both going to grow at tremendous rates, but not the way people expect. I think you're going to see a lot of medical and a lot of therapy in VR. I think therapy in VR makes the most sense. And I wear, not now, but sometimes I wear these blue glasses. I've had 4 massive concussions in my life. I've got traumatic brain injury in some areas, which is why I'm sometimes a little nutty. But every now and then, by the way, I do cry randomly, so people kind of laugh at it. I have a friend of mine named Ted Bishop who does the same thing. We both randomly cry, but his is different. He suffered a major injury. He's a great guy, but we all experience different things. And for me, it's been thinking about VR is about thinking about therapy. And I now work with a group that's called Praxi. If you go to praxi.dev, you can check it out. It's a really cool way to do eye training. And I've learned so much eye therapy from VR that I think it's really cool. AR is a different way of thinking about it. AR, I think, is a navigational tool. I think there will be some fun play. I love the people Magic Leap. I was never a huge thinking that it was going to be the awesomest thing in the world. I think AR is navigation because there's only so much this thing can actually process. Your brain still has to process it, so you've got to be conscious of that. But in AR, you can immerse. So there will be levels of both. But in my mind, VR will explode in therapy and experiences, and AR will explode in navigation. And the more you can navigate, safe navigation, especially construction work, military work, that's a really key thing. The technologies advance because they help things go faster and easier. That's it. Every technology that's been successful, that's continued, has made it either A, faster, or B, easier, or C, both. So I think that's where it's headed is my thing. But I really just watch MojoVision. That team is pretty darn awesome.
Yeah, the Metaverse.
Well, yeah, everyone loves the term. I was on a panel. I was at MetaBeat 2 days ago in San Francisco. What is a metaverse? I look at it differently. Internet 1 was text on the screen, and then you could scroll. That was cool. Internet 2, Web 2 was text on the screen with some video and some movement. Internet 3 is going to be go in. That's really what it is. That's what they're calling the metaverse. The metaverse is going to be a connection of a lot of things. So I'm part of a project called Mempo.xyz. That metaverse is going to be a central hub where other brands can come in and connect to us. And I've partnered with a gentleman named James, who's phenomenal. We've got a bunch of other people on our team, but James has this great vision for, okay, let's bring people together in a way where brands can show you and experience things, but do it in high quality. The reason why high quality is important is a lot of metaverse projects right now are blocky. Blocky works to start, but that's not the experience people want. I want to be able to see the threads of the fabric. I want to be able to understand why that's there. If I'm going to buy something, yeah, I'll buy a couple of cheap things here, but those things tend to fade. I think what's going to sustain over time is high quality graphical elements, and that's the metaverse, and that's where Web3 is going to connect you. Now, Web3 people goes, well, you didn't mention blockchain ownership. I'm not going to go there for the moment. We all know where that is. There's a gentleman I follow. I love his name is Theo Priestley. He's on LinkedIn. Just follow him. He's great. Sometimes he loves it. Sometimes he hates it. So I love watching those guys. They do a good job. I also follow Matt Sorg. I follow Sujal Shah on LinkedIn. Those guys have really good thoughts, and you can just watch and see where it is. I think those are really interesting to see what's there. But I think the metaverse is a lot to people. But if you want to see it grow, I would watch Mempo. I believe in it so much, I'm working on it. So that's obviously my background. And spending time with James and hearing his vision, I'm just more and more excited about where it's going to go because he really has a plan for it. And I look at my job as he's driving it and I'm going to help execute it. And that becomes really fun because now it's how do we build this world where brands can come in. And our first brand we worked with, Dunkaroos, was a lot of fun to see it. And now it's like, how do we make that better? How do we make an experience? And how do we drop people in? We have a partner group we work called Surreal. They're really nice. We have we just have a really good group of people that are saying, how do I build this experience? But we stopped answering the question, how do you define it? What is it? And the answer is, it's already here. It's three-dimensional graphics at scale, but it really is browser-based in my mind. It's not just download it. So the more I can remove hardware from your system, the better it is. And there's also an environmental impact, and some people argue about that, but if you think about it, if you have to buy a really big computer with a huge graphics card that's that big, it's going to cost you a lot of money and energy. But if I put that as a browser, well, that means that those graphics cards and those computers are in a cloud bank somewhere. So there might be an Amazon bank in Arlington, Virginia. It might be somewhere else. But those cloud banks are now shared. Well, shared resources are less than individual owned. It's the old, can you do public transit or can you do an individual car? We know public transit is better on the environment than a whole bunch of individual cars. Well, that's all the metaverse is going to become. If it's all cloud-based, your computer doesn't need to have massive hardware in it. That's actually kind of cool. So I believe that's where the metaverse is going.
Wow.
Probably a long-winded answer. There's also Matthew Ball really. I think Matthew Ball's book is the Metaverse book. That's a really good one. If you ever want another really good book to read, total tangent, but is William Collis's eSport book. William's great, good stuff. Yeah, I'm obviously ADHD and have a lot of energy, so I apologize to talk too fast. And you're like, wait, you went from one topic to the next? I apologize.
No, it's great, especially for me because I love that stuff. I just don't know how it works.
Yeah, Matthew Ball's book. Go check his book out because he talks about ultimately the metaverse will only grow and scale when you understand how servers work at speed. And for example, with Mempo, we do a thing called pixel streaming with Unreal, and those people in Unreal are amazing. But pixel streaming is a one-to-one relationship where you're effectively in the computer running around, and that gives you the high quality graphics. Everyone else is doing share splits, and your experience is okay, but it's voxel art, it's little box art. Okay, it's cool, but I want a high quality visual experience. I don't want to go down. I love Minecraft. Minecraft's great for when you're 10 years old. I mean, I play it as an adult, but Minecraft's really cool. I love it. But there's times that I want a Monday Night Football experience. I want a Sunday Night Football experience. I want high graphics, high visual because my time is valuable. And I think the more the metaverse experiences get to that high graphics, I mean, like I said, just look at Mempo. Just go to Mempo.xyz and check it out. You'll see what we're talking about. That is a lights out, beautiful experience. I'm into Decentraland. I think Decentraland's cool. No knock. And we're going to help Decentraland that. But I think what Mempo's doing, brands are going to look at it and go, "Oh, that makes sense. My stuff looks great there." Absolutely, yes, it does, and that's what the audience wants.
Speaking of audience, how is this technology being incorporated into sports, if at all, right now? I know augmented reality is, but what's the horizon look for that?
So, a friend of mine's name is Marv White, a really nice guy. I was at his house the other day having dinner. He, Stan, Jared, a whole bunch of guys created a thing called the First and 10 line, which launched in 1998. I think it was I want to say it was a Baltimore game. I can't remember. That thing almost never got off the air. People were like, what is this line on the screen? I mean, it was going to be the worst things in the world, and it was hard. Freddie and Jed pushed it. They said, it's going to work. It's going to be great. By game 3, everyone had to have it. And augmented reality in sports was born. And then, don't get me wrong, they've been used before, but the minute that line was in there, it was over. So that's the high water mark for everything. Everything else past that is all really, really cool. The VR game where you can be like Lamar Jackson, the quarterback from Baltimore. That stuff is really cool. That VR type training is going to be AR training soon. And you're going to be able to see like what a quarterback goes through. If you haven't checked it out, there's only one VR game for the NFL. Go buy it, check it out. You're going to see some really cool stuff in there. But as it goes into storytelling, you're going to see people start playing that game and go, oh, I have an idea. And I remember the First and 10 line, let me combine it. So you're going to get a lot more is the lines on the screen, but it's going to be relative to the audience and to the user. The best way to say that is all the data in the world doesn't mean anything unless it actually tells a story for you. So we made a pitch, still hoping for to a couple of the major gambling companies that you should customize the graphics on the screen to what the bets are. Real simple pitch, right? We own the technology. It's called QuinStream. It's one of our patents that if you see, the patent basically says if you're using augmented reality with the sporting video, with the betting data, we have an IP along that, and we believe that's the future. So if your bet is you bet, I don't know, let's say you're betting for the Broncos, Russell Wilson. You're going to bet Russell's going to have 5 throws to the outside. You want a graphic coming up showing you this is the 4th throw, and you want to know your percentage of winning your bet. But I don't care about Don's bet. I want to know Mark's bet. So that's ultimately where it's going to go to, and we're getting really close. The technology is actually there. I don't think the will is there yet. I think that's the hard thing. But the technology is there to where we can do that. It's more of a question of, are you ready to individually serve the consumer? And that's the moment when it will push through and people go, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing. We have the technology now. We're having a very hard time getting people to be willing to do it, but those things take time. We've been pushing for now 2.5 years. It might take another year, but one of these days, and we've talked to the folks in Park Avenue and pitched it to them, that's the NFL, and said, hey, this is cool. And the conversations are there, but it's a hard thing to be like, so you want an individualized broadcast? Like, no, you want an individualized augmented reality graphics presentation per user, per their bets. That's what happened. All of a sudden, at that moment, you're like, oh, that makes total sense. because now my bets, my information, I'm in. Like, and that's possible. It's not hard. So it just takes time. So I think that's the next piece that's going to tip over. So
I think you kind of hit something that I don't think a lot of people hit on: storytelling and data.
Yep.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, but I don't hear people saying that a lot, because it's more about storytelling about what's happening in an event, a game, or even, in the movies. But the data incorporated with that is just as important.
Two people taught me some fun things about that. Actually, three people, most likely. Oh, it's three people. Yeah. First is a guy named Jeff Bennett, who I think is still at ESPN as head of research or somewhere in that range. Jeff is great at it. There's a young woman named Tracy Mack, who I think she's now at Google. And there's a gentleman named David Arnold. And they would have really cool data, and they'd be like, this is how you tell the story. And I remember having an argument with Tracy one time. I'm like, no, I don't think she's like, look, I'm right. And I was like, oops, I messed up. And Dave was like, she is. I'm like, okay. And okay, how do we tell the story? And that was the moment I realized, okay, there's something here and I need to listen to it. She wasn't being rude, but she was like, look, pay attention. I've got something here. I was like, oh, you're right. Let's figure it out. And there was these conversations every day where, as a producer or graphics producer, or whatever your job was, that the researcher would show you, hey, this is why the data matters. The only thing I really added to that equation was, let's make it a graph, because people like colors and movement on screen. There's a woman named Jamie who made the first shot tracker, which is hilarious that they use a shot tracker at ESPN. Jamie made the first one. I don't even know what Jamie's doing now, but I was like, that was awesome. The little cool X's and O's popped up on the screen. Now a whole bunch of other companies are involved doing fun things, but it was the first shot tracker was live because we had the XY position where Kobe Bryant was shooting from. It was cool. Oh, this is really good. We actually had, long ago, it was actually Jordan, I think was one of the first ones, when he was still playing. That's how old it was. But I think it's when you understand the relationship in data and how they tell a story, and you can visually show it, it becomes really cool. And that's a moment where one graphic can change the outcome of how you make a decision, ultimately where you bet as a sports fan. And I don't gamble anymore, much on sports, but I used to bet a lot. I had one night in Vegas that I'll never remember, but it was one of those things where if you give someone really cool information, you present it in a way that they can digest it. The rule was not a rule, but a guideline. Gentleman Ed Macedo asked me, what is the brain time to figure it out? How long does someone figure out to read something on the screen? And my answer was 3.5 seconds. He goes, how in the heck could you know that? I said, I asked the researcher. He goes, what do you mean ask the researchers? So I gone and done research with how long it takes the brain to make a decision based on how many graphics and colors you have on the screen. And there was a old book with a guy named Edward Tufte, which is probably done in the 50s, about how people process information design. Still works to this day because your brain still works the same way. So it was like, that was the number. And we played around up or down, but that's kind of why graphics on SportsCenter stay on for a little over 3.5 seconds, because that's how long it takes your brain to process the information. And what do you do? So you got to understand that if you've got 3.5 seconds, how do you tell someone something cool? Which is also the same thing when we decide if we like a person or not. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell's Blink book, whatever that is one of those ones of people make decisions really quick. We just don't always know that our brain's done it. So if you're going to create a graphical story for data, make sure it's done in 3.5 seconds.
I could talk to you probably for another couple hours, but
I gotta go. My wife wants me to go for a while.
Okay, I'll leave you.
I'll leave you with this. You asked me what was the coolest memento I got in all the sports, and I will show you this. This is a random bat. It just says pro stock model, nothing. It's a random baseball bat. Here's how this bat came to be. So in 2000 or 2001, ESPN was contemplating changing the sign, the sign here, to a black and red. And I was in Arlington. It was in Texas. I was in Arlington, and we did a night game, and then they asked, could we leave the lights on? I was like, great. And they said, we need someone to stand up there and be a batter and grab a bat and swing at a couple of baseballs. And the people at the stadium said, okay. So I'm like, this is awesome. So I'm like my 20 years old. They're like, give it a bat. So I went and I was looking for a bat, and I grabbed the bat and I went to pick it up. And the guy's like, no, use my bat. I'm like, okay, cool. So this dude in a whole bunch of catcher gear hands me a bat. So I grab his bat and I go up there and I start swinging, and he's standing out there with me, and we're messing around, and guys are throwing me balls. And I got one to the fence, which was so cool for me. Like, I didn't get it over. I just hit the wall. I was like, this is cool. And I'm just up there hitting. And after a while, I was real tired. I must have gone through like 70 balls, and I was like, I can't swing anymore. And the dude could not stop laughing at me. And it was like, man, he's like, dude, you're so bad. Just keep the bat. So I kept the bat. So this is my bat. And years later, I'm in the ESPN cafeteria, and I see him again. He's now an analyst for ESPN. And I was like, hey, man, you gave me a bound. He goes, yeah, that was funny. You just kept swinging. I was like, you remembered? He goes, how could you not? It was funny. I was like, all right. That guy was Pudge Rodriguez. So I have a bat from a Hall of Famer that was his practice bat that no one else would know or care to see it. But to me, it was the coolest bat in the world. So this is the one thing I've kept because it has no name on it. It's just, for me, it was a cool moment. And somehow or another, dude remembered it. And it was just a really crazy moment of there. So that I'll leave that piece too. I also did this. Whenever there was a new talent at ESPN, I would sit down and say hi to him. So that's how I met Jerome Bettis in the cafeteria. I was like, hey, you're eating by yourself. Do you want to eat? Who are you? My name's Mark. Do you want to eat? He's like, yeah, sure. Because what happened was people wouldn't realize that even though talent are famous, they're still people, and they just need to eat. And they're eating by themselves. So I sat down. I got to meet George Karl one day. I was like, hey, yeah, I love the Sonics. You want to talk? He's like, you're a fan? I'm like, I work here. Do you want to eat? He's like, I'm not even anyone, so go ahead and sit down. So I used to eat with like Barry Melrose, just randomly, like random people would just sit and eat. And I got to meet so many people that way. It's just a lot of fun. Just a lot of fun just being like, hey, you got to eat. You want to eat with me? And he's like, all right, sit. So I would recommend to people, if you are trying to figure out how to go somewhere, this is the last piece of advice. Everyone has to eat lunch. Ask somebody, because no one wants to eat alone.
Yep.
Hey, man, you want to go out to lunch? That's it. Nothing fancy, but if you go out to lunch, you will network. So you asked me the question that day, so I'll tell you at the end, that was my secret to networking. Everyone's got to eat.
Yeah, I still remember that too. And just talking about the cafeteria once again, Vanilla Ice was standing in front of me when he was in town, and I struck up a little 3-minute conversation with him. You're right. They're regular people. It's just they're in the limelight, and they don't sometimes know how to react to other people. But
so I met John Bon Jovi that way, hilariously. And then we did like the Arena Football League with him. And then Jaws introduced me to him. And I'm like, well, that's the third time I met you. And he's like, I meet a lot of people. It's all good. And then inadvertently, I was at the NFL building in Park Avenue. And the elevator opened up, and it was Roger Goodell and John Bon Jovi. John goes, again? I'm like, hey, man, how are you? And he was like, who's that? I'm like, nobody. See you later. It was just one of those funny moments. Like, it all happened like in 3 weeks. He was like, really? You again? I was like, sorry. So you never know. Like, John Bon Jovi is never going to remember me. If you ever watch this, he would laugh. I have no idea who that guy is. Yeah. But for me, it was like in 3 weeks, he saw me so often. I was like, that was kind of cool. I got noticed. And that was my moment of fame. So I wish you the best. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Hopefully you get some decent content out of this. And if anyone wants to have fun, be determined, have fun, take people to lunch, and have a good time.
Mark, I really appreciate your time and all the insight. I learned a ton of stuff today, not just from the technical ESPN sports world, but how you can apply it in life. So thank you very much for all of that information that you gave. And I look forward to seeing you again soon sometime.
Yeah, I hope I didn't get anyone in trouble. We'll see. Happens to me every now and then. You have a great one. See you, man.
See ya. That was great information coming from Mark about his background. Great advice for anyone looking to get into sports, how technology is changing, and how he's positioning his companies to contribute to that environment. If you're a content creator and want to check out his company, visit ownyourstream.com to find out more. Also, next time you watch the NFL or college football, you'll know how it came to be with a PylonCam. For more Sports in the Making podcast episodes, visit our YouTube page, Sports in the Making Podcast, or take a listen on your favorite audio podcast platform. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook page @SportsMaking. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making. I'm Don Cardona.